Hello, everyone. I have a special guest with us today, Susan Dreyer Leon from the Antioch University. I hope I said all of that right, Susan.
You
I
did.
heard you speak recently, and I just thought what you have to say about mindfulness and the research behind it is just so fascinating. So I'll let you sort of start with your background and your passion and sort of the work that you've been working at. And I understand as you're the director of mindfulness education at Antioch that you've been looking at this for what, the last decade or so. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, thanks. It's really great to be here. Yeah, so I'm on the faculty at Antioch University. I work at the New England campus, and I'm the director of the Mindfulness for Educators program, which we started about, yeah, it's been maybe 11 years that we've been offering
Mm.
graduate certificates and MEDs, but even a couple of years before that, we partnered with the Berry Center for Buddhist Studies to offer a professional development option. Because we perceived, and I think this perception is still true, that in the rush to implement mindfulness practices with kids, teachers were being left out. And so
Mm.
we thought that there was quite a good variety of curricula being developed for kids. And there are some lovely programs for teachers, particularly Tish Jennings and Mark Greenberg have been working on the Care for Teachers program. Is really, really important work. But that there was a need perhaps for a next level training, a place where people could come to deepen their own mindfulness practice, either because their school was implementing mindfulness or because they themselves felt drawn to it, or sometimes people have had a long-term meditation or mindfulness practice or yoga practice, but they
Mm.
hadn't really thought about how they could put it together in their classroom with their actual teaching work. And so this program is specifically designed for teachers of any subject in any area. We've had university faculty, yoga teachers, community-based
Mm.
educators, K-12 educators, a lot of international school teachers because a lot of international schools are adopting mindfulness curriculum. So
Mm.
we've had teachers from all kind of corners of education and even informal. And the goal is to really think specifically about, okay, what in this in these practices can I bring into my classroom? Like
Mhm.
what can help me um uh, I'm going to say be a better teacher. That's a pretty bold statement, but most of our students are interested in that. You know,
Mm.
and I'm a big believer that if you take a master's program in education, you ought to feel like you're a better teacher when you graduate.
Right, right,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, let me tell you you're speaking to my heart, my passion, Susan. I strongly believe that mindfulness and yoga has to start with us first, and that's where the enthusiasm comes in. And it's all about the co-regulation, right? If we ourselves aren't calm and organized, how can we possibly be, as you say, the best teacher that we can be, right? And so last year I took on a subbing position in my local in the next town over, and what I found, and I hadn't been teaching for a number of years, and what I found was heartbreaking. It's an affluent community, the resources are there, amazing faculty, great principal, all those pieces. But I would say majority of the teachers were really struggling. And this is what we're hearing from our community at Kids Yoga Stories as well. So I wanted to get into the schools again and really see what it's like with boots on the ground. And it is very much there. And what I'm hearing from them talking about all of their colleagues in other districts across the country, where teachers are drowning, right? There's too much pressure, too much. The admin, is bringing on different curriculums, for example. A lot of the teachers have families also at home. I found those are the teachers that are struggling the most because they've got to come home and be a parent as well, right? But there definitely are some teachers who are thriving for sure, but I would say a majority are not. And I feel like this is what the research that you've been working on is such incredibly important work for all of us to think, okay, it's not just us. We're not alone. And this is a huge systemic issue, right, that we're going through. But what is it that you're seeing in the research and these takeaways that I heard you speak about? Talk to us a little bit about what that research is bringing up.
Yeah. So I am not myself a researcher. I am a consumer of research, and I'm a practitioner. And I feel like it's super important that we have people like me to build that bridge between research and practice, right? It's so important.
Yeah.
And so what the research is telling us is that, um, first of all, it's a really new field. So
Mm.
there's not like tons of great data, and there are not a lot of kind of longitudinal studies that can really help us see what's happening over time. But there are a couple of trends. So one of the trends that we found that I found particularly interesting was a big study done in the UK over quite a few years, the biggest to date of middle school students. And what they found is that the impact of the mindfulness practices on the middle school students showed some benefit in stress relief in particular, but no
Mm.
specific benefit for mental health for the students. But surprise on the side, the teachers who were trained to teach mindfulness reported a pretty big benefit. And so that was a really interesting kind of side component.
Mm.
There was also there's a couple of researchers who've been focusing on looking at reviews of research in mindfulness in careers. So they've been looking at like, okay, what does it do for healthcare practitioners? What does it do in the business world? What does it do in education? So this is Tim Lomas and Juan Carlos Medina and their colleagues, and their education report, which is now a few years old, I think it was like 2018 or 2019, is pretty optimistic. It's pretty hopeful, and it showed benefit for teachers coming out of most of the studies they looked at, and that those benefits included things like feeling less stressed. They showed statistically significant improvement in anxiety, in resilience, in distress, and in anger, with somewhat mixed results on burnout. So I feel like that kind of information is enough to allow us to say, we should be pursuing this. We should
Mm.
have multiple pathways for teachers to learn about mindfulness and to have an opportunity to explore, preferably in community with other teachers. That's one of our kind of theories of operation, is that teachers learn best with other teachers,
Yeah.
to
Right.
explore mindfulness and how it applies to their work. The other thing I want to stress is, particularly during COVID, mindfulness was really pushed forward as a wellness activity and as a stress reduction technique. And that is true. It is that. But it cannot make up for socioeconomic inequalities in schools. It can't make up for bad leadership and governance. It can't make up for underfunding. It can't make up for inhumane workloads.
Mm.
So I feel like that piece of the equation where people are sort of told, like, if you could just manage your stress, everything else would be better. Of course, we all want to be able to manage our stress better. There's nothing wrong with that, but that doesn't mean that it's okay to work an 8-hour day with no bathroom break, you know? So I think
Yeah.
that's the thing that we need to guard against. And I still think that we need more information about what types of practices are most beneficial, and what types of practices yield which kind of results, because it's not all the same. Dan Goleman and Richie Davidson, in their really good book, Altered Traits, which is a review of research of mindfulness in general, really found that like compassion practice yields one kind of result, deep meditation practice yields another kind of result. It matters how much you practice, it matters for how many years you practice. So these kinds of nuances of practice haven't been applied yet in the field, but that research is one reason why we have an EDD program, is some of our
Yeah.
master's program students are moving up to do doctoral work to look at just these questions. Um,
Yeah, I'm so glad
yeah.
you brought that up, Susan. I think it reminds me that why we call the yoga practice, it's not like a magic pill, right? And I think especially now, I mean, I'm guilty too, right? Yesterday I had a bit of a headache, pop an Advil, right? We're so used to this quick and easy fixes, whereas the yoga practice and mindfulness practice is for a long time. It's a lifestyle, right? It's who you be every moment you are in awake, right? And so I think that's the thing is having this thread. It's not like we're going to do mindfulness for a week and then if we don't have results, we're going to throw that, kick it to the curb, whatever, right? You're talking about this for educators to embrace it as another piece in their mental health toolkit, essentially, right?
Yeah. Yeah, in their mental health toolkit, and in their teaching toolkit. And I think this is another piece that this is where the creator of our program, Claire Stanley, who's now retired, she was a longtime teacher educator at the School for International Training, and she's worked with teachers all over the world. And in their MAT program, they developed a couple of core principles over 20 or 25 years. And some of what they really came to believe is that teachers learn experientially. They need things that they can
Mm.
apply to their teaching practice and kind of explore that and then reflect on it and share it with other people. And mindfulness is great for that. It's not just like something you do at home in your potentially non-existent spare time, right?
Right.
It's, and I think that's what people think, like, I can't meditate 30 minutes a day. Like, I can't
Right.
even take a shower. Um,
Right.
so
Yes.
what is it that we're asking people to do? And I think this is where Claire's experience has just been so brilliant, this curriculum that I now steward, I think of myself as a steward of it, has such a lovely, like, every 2 weeks, now take this into your classroom, now take this into your classroom, now take this into your classroom, and then you report back out to the group how it goes. And so, like, one of the very first things that we recommend that people investigate is pausing, just taking
Mm.
a pause. And Claire has a beautiful little article on it where she says it's like the the pause before the conductor starts the music.
Mm.
So it's like, and we really invite our students to explore, like, when's a good place in your teaching to pause? Like, is it after you take attendance and before you start the lesson? I don't know how it is for you, but when I first started teaching at a huge high school in New York City, and I had like 150 students every day, and my classes had 35 kids, and the building was totally chaotic, and the beginning of my class was awful. It was just awful.
Hmm.
And I realized that I was like hitting the classroom and we're being advised like you must teach bell to bell teaching. And I was like, I
Right.
could not take attendance, get the kids settled, start my lesson. And I was always asking them to be quiet before I was ready to teach. And you know what I mean? It was just like this. And then finally I was like, oh my God, I just have to stop and take attendance. Just take
Right.
attendance. And they can talk while I take attendance. It's fine.
Right.
And take a pause and then gather them in and then start the lesson, you know? And so it's just
Yeah.
learning. And that's really, the second thing that we're telling people to do is to like really um, be willing to like allow everybody to pause. It's good for you, it's good for the kids. Everybody takes the pause, and then you can begin together. It also really helps for you to check in with your body, right?
Mm.
So often when we get into teaching, we're not embodied. We're just
Mm.
in our head with our lesson plan. So we don't notice that, like, one person is crying in the corner, and this, it's like we can't take in the students. My colleague Terry Young, who passed away a number of years ago, did a big listening tour in all the schools in Vermont, and she came away with work that ended up in her dissertation where she said, all I know is wherever I go, teachers are unhappy. And she
Mm.
said, I think they're unhappy because they can't see the students. There's too
Mm.
much interference.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's so well said.
Yeah.
I,
And
I yes, I couldn't agree more. Like I just want to pause for a moment, right? That is that is everything, Susan, because if we could distill it, right? We could talk about, as you say, all of, if you line them up, as you mentioned, right? The administration, the underfunding, the undervalued, all of it, all of that sits in front of a teacher's face.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes me want to cry, honestly.
I
Like,
know.
it's just so sad. Like, I think about myself as a young teacher. I was so fortunate. I was working at private schools internationally. I was able to be creative, and I still had the American curriculum, but I had so much more freedom and flexibility and creativity and humor.
Right.
I miss the humor part of being in the classroom and having fun, and I mean, that's the learning process, right? And it's just not right. You see these really amazing teachers who've dedicated their lives, and they're just not getting their needs met. They can't, as you say, they can't just be teachers.
Mhm. Yeah, it's really true. And I think that, one of the hard things about the situation, I mean, it's always been true. I certainly know from my decade plus teaching in New York City, there were so many administrative and situational circumstances that interrupted anybody's ability to focus on teaching and learning. And I really feel like what happens is teachers have to mediate the mismatch between the system and the kids through their body, like with their being. And so having a kind of a way to do that or some strategies for doing that it's really helpful. Because
Mm.
otherwise it all just gets like lodged inside you. And so this is why, in addition to pausing, we really have emphasized that people check in with their body regularly and just
Mm.
really, and again, it can just take a few minutes. I mean, a few seconds. It's just, they don't have a few minutes.
Yeah.
So, like a few seconds to kind of catch your breath, notice that you're breathing. Maybe you notice that you have a headache. It can be so helpful because you might be going through your day thinking, like, oh, the kids are really on my last nerve today. I just can't stand it. And then you realize, oh, I have a toothache. So it really helps to just kind of get to the body. And also, the body is where, from a Buddhist psychology perspective, the body is where we metabolize emotion. I mean, that's what the body is for, actually, is to allow us to have feelings, to have those feelings move through us and not kind of all get stuck there. So being able to
Yes.
check in with the body and to even consciously relax the body. I mean, if you can get in the habit of relaxing your body a dozen times a teaching day for no reason, it just takes a second. Just lower your shoulders, take a deep breath, bring everything down. It can be very helpful.
That reminds me of Mark Brackett's work, Ruler, and it's helping you. If you're taking that pause, as you say, and you're getting in tune with your body, you're more able to notice how you're feeling, recognizing it, right? And as you say, you might have a toothache, you might have some extra stress or have something happening at the moment. Last year I had grief collided with my teaching day, and, it was a lot. And I could feel, okay, I am overly emotional right now because I've got these other things going on. And so that that limits my co-regulation skills, right? When I've got all these other things. And then I was thinking about what you're talking about with compassion. So once we recognize, right, recognize how we're feeling and what's underneath that, then it's the how human of me, the compassion practice, right? The hand on heart that recognize like this is hard. This is really hard.
Yeah, and that's what our students tell us. So that's the third thing on my list is the heart practices. So
Mm.
pausing, embodiment, and then the heart practices. And it's, what's lovely about mindfulness, and we know this from 2,600 years of meditating mystics of all traditions writing down their experiences, is that these things that we consciously cultivate also co-arise with mindfulness naturally. So when we
Mm.
become present, we become mindful. Sometimes compassion spontaneously arises, or we can practice compassion deliberately in order to prime the pump, as it were.
Mm.
And so compassion kindness,
Mm.
equanimity, and gratitude. These practices are extremely helpful. And our students often report them as game changers. And it's not that they were like unfeeling, cold, horrible people
Right.
beforehand, like not at
Right, right.
all. But
Yeah.
it allows a kind of attunement for them. And I love the research on compassion from Kristen Neff in particular
Mm.
and Chris Germer that shows that compassion is incomplete if it's not bidirectional. We have to have compassion for ourselves in order to fully have compassion for others, and vice versa. It requires both. It's like a circuit that requires
Mm.
both halves to close. And so it's really important that teachers cultivate self-compassion and compassion for their students. And we use a reflective practice process from Carol Rogers. She's a Dewey scholar at SUNY Albany, and she outlines this process of like deep description. So students start by kind of describing a moment, really looking at it, then kind of separating description from judgment and analysis. So then there's like an analysis process, and then there's a perspective taking process where you really try to look at that moment. Okay, so what is this from my perspective? Okay, now what is it from the perspective of the significant other participants, my student, for example? And then looking at the context, like what is the overall context in which this event happened? And then looking and considering wise action. And so sometimes our students are writing about, oh, I was able to see the wise action in the moment because
Mm.
mindfulness helps us separate our reactivity from our responses.
Mm.
So when we can slow down a little bit, we can say, like, oh, that kid has their cell phone out again. And then we're mad, and then we're yelling, and then we feel bad, right? So we're trying to, like, can we interrupt that cycle? And so what we're hoping for is, oh, that kid has their cell phone out again. Widen their view. Like, oh, 6 kids have their cell phones out. So that's helpful, right? Because now you're not going to target that same kid who you always see because they always have their cell phone out. You've like widened your perspective. You're going to relax the body. Then you're going to choose your response. And that leads you into wise action. And so that cycle has so many benefits. And it doesn't really take longer than your original, like yell at the student, everybody feels bad. But you get less gunk. Like you're not, as
Mm.
mindfulness teacher Michelle McDonald says, you're not a smoky fire, right? We're trying not to be a smoky fire by kind of making sure we're burning clean. And I
Right.
think that's the real benefit. And that's where our students often have their biggest aha moments
Mm.
is once you see like, oh, I am not my thoughts and feelings. Like I have thoughts and feelings. In that space, there's a choice. And when there's a choice, then a whole different set of opportunities opens up for us and for the kids.
Right. And what I'm hearing too from you is that it's not like mindfulness is going to make everything go away.
Mm.
Right? It's not gonna be like it's not gonna walk in and all of a sudden you're not gonna feel frustrated. I remember years ago someone said to me, "Oh, well, you practice yoga, so I'm surprised you're really angry about this." Like, it's not that just because yoga mindfulness is in our life that everything's better. It's about exactly like you described, it's about having that pause and having a strategy in which to respond in a healthy, productive way, right? For yourself and for the relationship and for the whole classroom,
Right,
right?
right. Because we set the weather, right? Like it or not, like
Mm.
we really set the weather in our classrooms. And so if we're a smoky fire, then everybody's going to suffer. And I think that
Yeah.
part of what's the high side, the virtuous cycle of this is not just that there's behavioral and attitudinal, is that it can get right into the learning cycle. It's like things
Mm.
are calmer. I'm seeing more clearly. There's nothing, I think, more enjoyable for a teacher than seeing student learning, than having
Yeah.
that moment where we go, oh, I see what you're doing here. That's actually great. But here, let me show you the next obvious thing for you. That's what we
Mm.
love, but we often
Yeah.
don't have time for it, or we don't feel like we have the space to be able to really see student learning and do our job, the thing we're there to do that we love so much, which is really
Yeah.
help each person along their learning path.
I want to loop back in the beginning. You were talking about the key findings that or learnings that you've been looking at is to help people become better teachers. Can you expand a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that I'm interested in graduate education for teachers and what it means. And they're kind of three areas. There's new content, and people want new content skills that they can build and stuff like that. And there's a kind of opportunity for research and inquiry into where the field is going. But I think the most interesting piece is reflective teaching practice. And I feel like, especially for adult learners and teachers, especially with some experience, I'm not very likely from my perch as a professor to be able to tell you what you need to do to improve your teaching. But in the 12 or so years I've been associated with this program, I've developed so much confidence in teachers' ability to find out for themselves. If
Mm.
we set the conditions for reflective practice, then teachers can often tell us or tell each other or tell themselves, oh, this is what I need. But they need the space to slow down and to be able
Mm.
to look. And then they need the compassion, right? And the perspective, because teaching feels really personal. It's like acting. When things go badly, you feel bad and you feel
Mm.
responsible. And it's hard to look at that. And it brings up a lot of shame and it brings up a lot of guilt. And so sometimes what happens is people stop looking at their practice because it's too painful.
Mm.
So I feel like mindfulness can help prevent us from getting kind of calcified into a role where we don't much like ourselves. I mean, I kind of think of them as like the horsemen of the apocalypse. It's like we don't like ourselves, we don't like our kids, and we don't like the curriculum. Like,
Right.
what are we
Right.
doing?
Yeah, yeah. Right.
Yeah, and so to kind of either peel away those layers or not let that develop, I think what we want is to keep inviting a space where people can be reflective practitioners. And I feel like mindfulness is the perfect vehicle for that because it allows you to look with self-compassion. And, maybe you find things like, this is an undoable job. That
Mm.
might be something that you find. And then maybe we adjust our expectations. You might discover, like, oh, I mean, I don't know how it is for you, but for me as a high school teacher, I was trying to give essays on the regular basis. And it took me so long to grade them and correct them. You can imagine the first year teacher, we've all been there. And then I just kind of sat down with my calculator and I was like, oh, literally not enough hours in the day. It's not
Right.
just me, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
then you begin to adjust your expectations instead of walking around all day going, I'm a failure,
Yes.
right?
Oh my gosh, that reminds me. My kindergarten class, I taught it years ago. I thought the same thing. I had this moment of thinking, these 5-year-olds won't know that I've spent 3 hours getting whatever prepped. I'm just going to do a quicker lesson and then spend more time with them and it'll be fine because we have such high expectations, as you say, right? When especially with elementary in terms of your grading in high school, but for elementary, the young ones, right? It's just there's so much prep, right? There's props you want to make and the crafting and the arts and all that sort of thing. So yes, focus on what matters most is the
Right,
connection to yourself, the connection to the children,
right.
right?
And that's been such a great fit. Antioch has a really long tradition of student-centered learning, and especially the New England campus, which was started out just as a graduate school of education. And and we really have always emphasized looking deeply at the children. And I think that
Mm.
one of the things that mindfulness really allows our students to do, and we have other classes that focus on this too, like child studies and so on, where we're just really asking people to relax their intensive focus on what the teacher is doing
Mm.
and really bring your attention to what the students are doing. And I
Mm.
think that that shift, along with kind of the capacity for, I want to just say relaxing a little bit. Like when you go into schools now, I don't know how you find it, but I find it's like it's like a lid on a boiling pot. You can just
Mm.
feel the
Yes.
vibration
100%.
of all of the anxiety of the students
Yes.
and the teachers all the time.
Yes.
And so I'm super interested anytime I walk into a building that doesn't feel like that. Um, like our local middle school doesn't feel like that. And I really looked so closely at what is going on there. And I
Mm.
was like, they are more focused on the kids than they are on the curriculum. It's really clear.
Mm.
Um,
Wow.
and uh, I think that's the right I think that's the right way to go. Our curricular expectations are not very
Mm.
realistic. They're not really based much on how people actually learn.
Right. And it is like, bigger issues, Susan, than we can talk about today. But, I
Yeah.
mean, this we're just trying to offer folks just like a moment. Well, like what's one thing you can do? But this involves all of us. It involves the parents and the caregivers, the administration, your colleague. I mean, no, it's everyone. We're in this together. And I think about, you know, so many teachers are in their jobs and they're going to be there till retirement. So how do we have what advice can we give those educators, right? It could be pediatric therapists or teachers and, all the support staff at schools. How do we help? What advice do you have really for those educators who, are overwhelmed, drowning? They are going to stay in this job until they retire, and they just need a fresh perspective, right, on how are they going to make it through without waking up every day in dread, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Mm.
I really do think that uh, one of the most important things you can do is to really make friends with your own mind. I know it
Mm.
sounds trite, but it's actually everything because we add to our own suffering, right? This is a core teaching in mindfulness
Mm.
practice, the teaching of the two arrows, where the first arrow is you stub your toe, and the second arrow is you beat yourself up for not putting your shoes on or not tucking the chair away or being such a klutz. And so we compound our own suffering with
Mm.
our thinking. And I think that one of the first things that people can do is to really take a look at their habitual thought patterns. And
Mm.
again, with a lot of self-compassion, we're conditioned, right?
Mm.
We're not in charge of what thoughts and emotions pop into our minds. That was those conditions were set a long time ago. But what we do have control over is what we do when we notice that we have these habit patterns. And so
Mm.
when you can identify that you have certain habit patterns that are participating, contributing to your suffering, then you can begin to examine those patterns and loosen their hold and break them down. And
Mm.
it can profoundly transform your life, even if your external conditions remain very difficult. Um, and so I really feel like this is it sounds like nothing, but it's actually everything. It's really the hidden reaction. I mean, it's not what happens to us that defines our lives. It's the sense we make of it. It's the stories we
Mm.
tell ourselves and how we work with our experience.
Oh, Susan, I could spend all day with you. Thank you so much. I so like you so many words of wisdom that you shared with us. Thank you so much.
Thanks
So if
for the
people want to connect with you further and learn from you, I know you have a newsletter you send out, right? How else can people find you and learn from your
Yeah,
work?
my contact information is available on the Antioch website. It's just antioch.edu. And I think that I'm not just interested in recruiting people for programs. I'm interested in colleagues and collaborators and hearing from other people about their experience, sharing
Mm,
information and ideas. So I really encourage people to just reach out. It's always good
mm.
to connect.
Awesome. Excellent. So if we leave people with the one thing, right? Because it can be overwhelming. The one thing, if they could go away with one practice, what would you say?
Try pausing.
Yeah, figured as much. Thank you so much. I really so
Too.
appreciate you.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank
for
you.
your
Thanks
time,
for the
Susan.
opportunity.
Thank you.